Hey, Michael here, and you're listening to part 4 of creating the best team in Pokemon Go for battling in the future. So, if you've listened to some of my other parts, I'm going to bring up ideas that I've been having each individually. Now we're going to start putting all of these ideas together. I do want to say this is not the end. I've got a couple more ideas of theories of things I want to factor into the game, but it's more going to be now that I have good types. Now, then I'm going to be looking at better moves for that type. So this is still going to be kind of type theory in Pokemon Go. So some of this is going to just be repeat from other parts that you've already listened to, but if you haven't seen part or listened to parts 1 through 3, this is probably all going to be new information. Again, I recommend that, or I'll probably just put up a picture of the type chart in front of you. That way you can follow along. But information I'm starting off with, looking at all the types, and we're looking at what types have the most strengths, or the things that they're super effective in Pokemon Go. So we have ground and fighting, have 5. Fire, ice, rock are at 4. Water, grass, steel, fairy, bug, flying are at 3. That means they're good against 3 different types. Electric, dark, poison, psychic, ghost are all at 2, and dragon is only 1 with being super effective against itself. Next, we are looking at weaknesses. So, what has the fewest weaknesses of things that are super effective against it? So, electric only has 1 weakness to ground. Normal is 1, and it's weak to fighting. Fairy, poison, and water, and ghost all have 2 weaknesses. Fire, fighting, ground, flying, psychic, bug, dragon, dark, and steel all have 3. Ice is sitting at 4 weaknesses. Rock and grass have 5 weaknesses. Next, along the weakness idea, opposite of that, now let's look at the Pokemon types with the most resistances. That means it's going to take not effective damage if it's in a battle. Excuse me. The one that really blew my mind and it has the most resistances in the entire game is Steel. Steel is sitting at a whopping 11 resistances. It is resistant to normal, grass, ice, poison, flying, psychic, bug, rock, dragon, steel, and fairy. And I'll tell you why that just blows my mind, but it's going to switch up my entire playstyle, I think, in my teams of 6. Next, with 6 resistances is fire. Poison is sitting at resistant to 5 types. Water, ghost, rock, grass, dragon, and flying are all at 4. Electric, fairy, fighting, ground, bug, and dark are at 3 resistances. Psychic only has 2. Ice and normal only have 1 thing they're resistant to. Next, we are looking at pretty much looking at the top 30 Pokemon, and this is including Gen 2, and again, I will say this is only overall CP. I know CP is a bad indicator, but CP takes into account everything. So, looking over, this is just off the Silph Road website. Include Gen 2. This does not include Mythics and Legendaries yet. They're going to be rare. They're not going to be super easy to come by when they are available. If battling gets a little bigger, whenever it does, and whenever it's implemented, and people really start to get legendary birds and they're heavy on the trade list, it might be something we're going to need to look at a lot more. But one random little cool thing about legendary birds, they all have flying. So something strong against flying is probably going to be really good. And if you've already been paying attention, electric has 1 weakness, and it's got some resistances at 3, but it is good against flying. So that's something to think about in the future. But when I went through all of the Silph Road's top 30 Pokemon, I looked at different types. And so pretty much I just made a check or a tally next to every, as I went through the Pokemon, like Dragonite has Dragon and Flying as its types. So I put a tally in Dragon category and Flying category. After adding all those up in the top 30, here's what we have. Water, there are 6 water types, 5 rock, fire and flying are both at 4. That's not including legendary birds. Psychic is 3, along with bug and normal. Electric, fighting, poison are all at 2. Like electric being Jolteon, I believe, and Ryukyu. So those are the 2 electrics in the top 30. Grass, ice, ghost, dragon, dark, and steel all have 1, and fairy, there are no fairy Pokemon in the top 30. Why is that important? It is important because at the end of the day, people are going to look at the top CP Pokemon in Pokemon Go. So it is less likely that you're going to see a fairy Pokemon when battling against people. So it's something you probably don't need to have as much resistance for or be super effective against. Whereas water, there's a lot of water Pokemon regardless, so you might want to have something that resists water kind of heavily or is super effective against water. So that's kind of everything so far. That's looking at weaknesses, strengths, resistances, and what I think is going to be very visible in Pokemon battling, with the most part being water. Water is going to be very prevalent in Pokemon battling, so let's start there. A Pokemon that we're definitely going to want to have is something that is strong against water. So, something that is good against water good against water is electric. Electric is good against water. It also has one weakness, and that is to ground. Electric doesn't have, it only is good against 2 different types, but one of those types is water, and the other is flying. Those are 2 things that are going to be very prevalent. Dragonite has a high CP and is pretty rare, and I think people are going to be running Dragonites, and there are a lot of water in the top sets. So an electric Pokemon would be a great Pokemon to throw in your team. But we're kind of just looking at like the very top ones. Ground and fighting are very good against a lot of different types. Ground has only 3 weaknesses, and it has 3 resistances. Ground's okay. The other one that is super effective against 5 different types is fighting. Fighting has 3 weaknesses, flying, psychic, and fairy. And fighting also has 3 resistances, so bug, rock, and dark. So kind of looking at Pokemon types that are effective against a lot of stuff, ground and fighting are both pretty even. So I'm not exactly sure which one I would want, but I think I would rather take maybe fighting, just because ground is weak to water, and with a larger number of probably water Pokemon in the game or that you will see in battling, it might be better to have a fighting type Pokemon if you're looking at the 2 different types. And this is, I know a lot of Pokemon have multiple types, and sometimes the Pokemon do moves that aren't the same, but it's still something to look at if we're just looking at basic type matchups. So ground might be slightly worse than fighting. The one interesting thing is that ground is also one that has the most types it's super effective against, and it just happens to really destroy electric. So ground, electric, and fighting are definitely something you want to consider in your team, no matter what. One that, looking at resistances, steel has 11. This jumped out to me really big. It is almost double any other resistances in the game, and it only is weak to 3 things: fighting, ground, and fire. Again, it is weak to fighting, which has the most types that it's effective against, but steel that needs to be a top contender. If steel is really this good, it might need to be something you need to consider putting in your team just because it is steel. An example of this is Scizor. Scizor is not really in the top, I don't remember if it's in the top 30. No, it is. It is 18 down in the top 30 CP Pokemon, sitting at a max CP of 2,801. After looking at all of this data, I am seriously considering throwing in Scizor into my team composition, no matter what. It has so many resistances. It could have problems on attack or defense or stamina. I know there could be some weird little problem with it, but the fact that it's resistant to so much and only really super weak against fire, because fire is going to do a lot of extra damage because it's both a bug and steel. But I'm really considering putting this Pokemon in just because of how good I think it might be in the long run. I think this might be a big contender, and a Pokemon that a lot of people aren't going to think about right away, but that one that might end up just having so many resistances that a lot of Pokemon will attack, and it'll be like, oh, really? You're going to attack me with Fairy? You're going to attack me with Ice? I mean, okay, I don't really care. But again, since it is a bug and steel, it is super weak to fire, and it also, because of the bug part, is weak to fighting and ground. 2 types that have a lot of things that they're super effective against, the top 2. So this is iffy, but after looking at all of this data, I have kind of come to the conclusion that I really want to have probably an electric Pokemon in my team, a steel, ground, fighting, or in order of types, just kind of like laying out all the information. Electric is probably the best just because it counters water so well. It counters flying, and it doesn't have that many weaknesses. Steel has so many resistances. I think I'm going to run steel up there. Ground and fighting are pretty even, but again, with ground having its weakness to water, I think ground might be a little lower. So I think I would put fighting above a ground type Pokemon. Then fairy, water, and poison are also major type contenders. And so this is a list of 7 types to consider in your 6-man team. I would strongly consider at least 3 of these, just on principle alone, not on movesets, not on anything else. But for right now, I'm really considering running an electric, a steel, and either a fighting or a ground regardless. I know these are the best, but I might switch it up and put a water in versus a fairy. But with how many people might be looking at, like, oh, there's so many water, I need to have something that counters water, and how good electric is, water might be something I want to go without. I'm not exactly sure yet, but these are the 7 probably best types overall in Pokemon Go. And again, I know some moves like Dragonite. Dragonite is dragon flying. It has a normal move of Hyper Beam. It has a steel fast attack. It doesn't get its stab bonuses, and it doesn't have a flying attack in it. It just says dragon, steel, or normal. But still looking at just kind of basic ideas of type advantages, these are probably the 7 best types in Pokemon Go overall. And I can't stress enough how important I think these 7 types are going to play in future battling matchups. And I think you will start to see how well these types do once battling is implemented. And you'll see that, the top players are really running an electric and steel Pokemon. So maybe I should either start figuring out ways of countering that, or maybe electric and steel are really just that good for types. So using this information, then you can go through all the lists of some of the top Pokemon and be like, okay, I really want to run this in my deck just because it's so effective against so many things. So use all of this information. Again, I'm going to keep doing these parts. I've got some really new idea. I'm just waiting on some more information, and then when I have that, I will decide if I'm going to pass on to you or if I'm going to keep it a little secret and maybe use it to my advantage so that I can be a top PvP Pokemon Go player. But as always, be the best there ever is.